and Frederick are with me in the Asia Pacific team. Paul is based in the US. He will share more about himself later. And I will pass it over to now Jeff to share more about BioMelbourne and this session. So Jeff, please.
Thank you for that, Sakina. Good afternoon, good morning, or evening from wherever you're joining us today, and welcome to this MedTech Innovator Asia Pacific Live information session. My name is Jeff Malone. As Sakina said, I'm the CEO of BioMelbourne Network, and it's my great pleasure to be here to open the event in collaboration with MedTech Innovator Asia Pacific. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their continued connections to land, sea, and culture. I pay my respects to their elders past, present, and emerging, and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders who may be joining us online today. I'm personally joining you from the land of the Wurundjeri people. Today's event is an opportunity for startups and scale-ups in our sector to learn about the benefits of applying to MedTech Innovator, the world's largest accelerator for devices, diagnostics, and digital health. Throughout the event, you'll be learning about the program, which is currently open for applications, and you'll also gain insights and tips from MedTech Innovator alumni and a corporate partner on the application process itself. Following the talks, there'll be an audience Q&A session. We encourage you to submit any questions you have for our speakers throughout the event via the Q&A function. Thank you very much to MedTech Innovator Asia Pacific for the opportunity to collaborate on this event today. And thank you to all of our speakers for joining us. We've got Paul Grant, Chief Executive Officer of MedTech Innovator, Alex Newton, Chief Executive Officer of Navi Medical Technologies, Jacqueline Savage, Chief Executive Officer of MedCorp Technologies. It's now my pleasure to hand you over to Paul Grant to facilitate the discussion. So over to you, Paul.
Hey, thank you very much, Jeff. It's a pleasure to be here. We really appreciate your partnership at BioMelbourne and love participating in your events as we have for several years. So thank you very much for your gracious hosting. I also want to introduce a couple of other members of the MedTech Innovator team. So you've met Sakina, our program director, already. Let me just quickly introduce Frederick Nyberg. So Frederick, you want to say hello?
Hi, good morning and good afternoon, everyone. My name is Frederick Nyberg. I'm Managing Director for MedTech Innovator Asia Pacific, based here in Singapore. Thanks very much, Paul. Look forward to the session.
Thank you very much, Frederick. And we also have Dev. Dev, you want to say hello? Unless you are on mute. Yeah. We can introduce you at the end, or you can say hello quickly.
Hello, everyone. My name is Devira. I am Program Assistant of MedTech Innovator, and I am based in Indonesia. And yeah, hand it over back to Paul. Thank you, Paul.
Thank you. All right. So hi, everyone. As you heard, I'm Paul Grant, CEO here at MedTech Innovator. Let me go ahead and turn off the screen sharing here for a moment and just introduce myself. So I'm the CEO at MedTech Innovator. Previously, I was an entrepreneur, started 8 different companies in tech, medtech, and biopharma. And then I spent nearly 12 years as a venture capitalist. So I've been both on your side, if you're a startup company, or if you're on the venture side, I've been on your side as well. And now I work very closely with some of the leading strategics in our industry to make sure that incredible technologies actually succeed in reaching patients. So you're going to learn more about that in our program and what we do at MedTech Innovator today. This is, as you heard, a virtual info session. The idea is to give you, if you're out there in the world wondering if you should participate in MedTech Innovator, a chance to understand why you might want to participate in a program like this. Now, our program is a combination of a virtual and in-person program. For the last couple of years, we've been mainly virtual for not a surprising reason with COVID, but you're going to hear a lot about the program tonight, and a little bit about that. I'll be talking about it in both the context of being an in-person and a virtual program. Our anticipation is that this year will be kind of a combination of both, as it was in the last couple of years. So you'll hear more about that. You're going to get a chance to meet some of the alumni who've participated in our program, and they'll share a little bit about their experiences in the program. And most importantly, we're going to answer your questions. So at the bottom of the screen, as Jeff mentioned, there's a Q&A function. You can click that button and you can queue up questions for us throughout the discussion today. We're going to break it about halfway through and I'm going to start taking questions. So, and then we'll go back and forth. So make sure you put your questions into the Q&A box at the bottom of the screen. All right, so with that, let me get to a very brief overview of MedTech Innovator and explain to you what it is that we're doing here. So MedTech Innovator is an accelerator. We are the largest healthcare accelerator in the world by far. We are the largest. There's other incubators and accelerators. I can assure you we are the largest accelerator. And our mission is to improve human health by accelerating the growth of companies that are transforming care. And by that, I mean the early stage and mid-stage companies that get to participate in MedTech Innovator. These are companies that we find from all over the world. We run a program both in the US and a program in Asia Pacific. I'll tell you more about those in a moment. But our whole focus is to make sure that the innovators, like the ones you see here on the stage, at the APAC MedTech Forum back in 2019, we want to make sure these companies succeed in reaching patients. That's what this is all about. At the bottom of the screen, you see our URL, medtechinnovator.asia, and my email address, paul@medtechinnovator.org. If you're interested in learning more, you can go to either that website or you can email me. So now, quickly, MedTech Innovator, as I mentioned, we're pretty large. We have 420 alumni companies in our portfolio. Since 2013, when we started doing this, 95% of the companies who've been through MedTech Innovator are still in business or have been acquired. That is unbelievable. I can tell you as someone who sits on this side of the table, usually you read that companies, half of them have gone out of business, but that is not the case in MedTech Innovator. Our alumni have brought 90 plus products to the market. They've raised over $4 billion in follow-on equity funding after MedTech Innovator. So if you're accepted into MedTech Innovator, you're joining that kind of a group of companies. In 2021 alone, our companies raised close to $2 billion in funding. We had 21 acquisitions, half of which were last year alone. So it's a pretty incredible ecosystem to be part of. We do all sorts of things in addition to participating in just the accelerator program. We have incubator awards that we give out, which I'll tell you more about later. It is really an incredible opportunity to be part of just an unparalleled ecosystem of peer support, as well as support from others in the industry. I will tell you it's very competitive. Last year, we had 1,800 companies apply globally to be part of MedTech Innovator. We accept 90 of those companies basically each year. Quickly, there's 3 programs in MedTech Innovator. There's our US program that's for companies that are interested in accessing the US market as their primary market. Our BioTools Innovator program, which is focused on life science tools companies, and MedTech Innovator Asia Pacific, which we're going to be talking mainly about today. All 3 of these in MedTech Innovator Asia Pacific for companies that want to access the Asia Pacific market as their primary market. All 3 of these are programs that you can apply for. You can do all of that at medtechinnovator.asia if you go through that entryway, or medtechinnovator.org, either one will get you the gateway to apply to any of these programs. You can apply to all 3. We're only going to pick you for one. So we'll tell you more about that. The BioTools Innovator specifically is for companies that are in the life science tools space. The others are for medical device, diagnostic, digital health companies, not biopharma. So if you're developing a drug or biopharma, and a small molecule or a biologic, that's not for MedTech Innovator. If you're, however, developing maybe a combination device, a drug delivery device, that is just fine for us. Now, very importantly, MedTech Innovator is almost like a corporate accelerator in that what we're doing is we're trying to pair startups and early stage companies and scale ups in some cases with strategics who ultimately might be one of their partners. So we're going to have a lot of engagement with the people you see here on the slide: Johnson & Johnson, Nipro Medical Corporation, Align, Cambridge Consultants, Enterprise Singapore, Oliver Healthcare Packaging, Siemens Healthineers, and Jabil are some of our sponsors for this year's program. If you're lucky enough to be accepted, you get to work with these people. So we'll tell you more about that in a little bit. One of the things I want to make sure I point out here is that we're trying to do at MedTech Innovator is find the most compelling companies and make sure you do not fail for the wrong reason. We hate to see great companies fail for the wrong reason. And by that, I mean doing things like you see here on the slide. This is an article actually we wrote in Stat News a couple of years back. If you were to Google 10 reasons why healthcare startups fail, you'll find the article with all the details. I'm only going to point out one number right now, which is number 10 on this list, which is staying in your echo chamber. And what we mean by that is if you're a company that basically spends all of its time talking to the same people, you're just kind of getting this echo back and forth from the same people telling you the same thing. And I can promise you that you are not hearing the whole story. And so what we encourage people to do is get out of your echo chamber, get out of your ecosystem and meet other people across the region, across the globe, and find out what they think about what you're doing, because you will hear very different things than you hear from the people you talk to all the time. I can promise you one of the things that I hear the most from companies when we go around and we travel and meet with them, MedTech Innovator, is they say things like, hey, no one's ever told me that before. And that's generally because people don't necessarily always tell you the whole truth. When they're your neighbor or they're your friend or they're your colleague, they don't want to tell you everything they think. You know, like you may give a presentation and they clap and they go, great job. And then you walk out of the room and they go, ooh, man, like that thing is just going to be never going to make it. I can tell you, I've been in those rooms many times. At MedTech Innovator, we don't do that. You come in the room, you tell us, you give us your presentation and we will tell you what we think. So that's something I can promise you. Very quickly, the way this program works is you apply to MedTech Innovator. Last year, we had 500 plus companies apply in our Asia Pacific program. We selected about 60 of those to pitch at our pitch events, which is a road tour that I'll tell you more about. 20 of those companies then advanced to be selected for our accelerator program. Those companies, that's the prize. Being in the accelerator, being part of that, that is really the prize. However, we do actually have a finals competition at the end, in which case we award multiple prizes. It'll be $300,000 in total this year. In the US, $300,000 that'll be awarded in the 2022 APAC program. The first prize will be $175,000 and there'll be additional awards as well. But as I said, the program is the prize. Some key dates here. So we're in our application cycle right now. Applications will be open through February 15th. Then we will do our online and in-person pitch events if we're lucky enough to do some in person. We'll select our accelerator companies in May. Then we'll have the actual program from June through August, which you're going to hear more about. And then we end in September with the Asia Pacific Showcase and Finals at the Asia Pacific MedTech Forum. The program itself is designed specifically to support early to later stage, high quality startups. There's no equity or participation fees for participating in MedTech Innovator. So we don't take any equity for you to participate. It's completely free to you. The only thing you might have to pay for is travel. In some cases, if you travel to one of our events, we're completely agnostic to geography. So whether you're in Australia, whether you're in Singapore, Japan, anywhere you are, or you can be in Europe, it doesn't matter to us. We just want to find the best companies who are looking to enter the Asia Pacific market, in this case for this program. We customize the program to you and your stage of development. The mentors, everything will be customized for you. We can support companies from pre-seed all the way through Series C and beyond. So it's not just for startups that are just getting started. This is for companies, as I said, that are up and running, that have a team, that have a prototype, and usually some kind of evidence to convince us that it's going to work. So we're looking for those kinds of companies. And we provide mentorship and other resources, a customized curriculum, and access to our corporate partners, which is unbelievable, I can promise you. You're going to hear things from them that you just haven't heard from other people, because they're interested in partnering with you. And that's the whole point here, is they're trying to make you a better company. We also offer the prizes and some of the things I mentioned before, as well as an amazing peer network. The road tour I mentioned will be either virtual or in person, depending on restrictions. But basically, you get a chance to meet with and pitch all sorts of investors, strategics, customers, as well as others who are involved in stakeholders in the industry. I mentioned some of the key benefits already, but I will point out here that the end of our program is at the Asia Pacific MedTech Forum, which is held in Singapore. And you can see the stage there on the screen. So our companies that make it to the finals are up there in front of the entire industry audience, competing for the vote of the industry. So it's the leadership of the industry. It's the CEOs and the vice presidents and others who are at these leading companies in the audience, and they're the ones who pick the winner. So whether we do it in person or we do it online, as we did last year, I can promise you it will be an incredible journey and opportunity. All right, so that's enough of the background. Hopefully you got to learn a little bit. As I mentioned, if you have questions, hit the Q&A button, queue those up, and we will get to your questions later on in the discussion. What we're going to do now is I'm going to introduce two of MedTech Innovator's alumni from 2021 in the Asia Pacific program. We have Alex Newton, who's the CEO of Navi Medical, and Jacqueline Savage, the CEO of MedCorp Technologies. They're going to tell you a little about their companies and their experiences in MedTech Innovator. So with that, let me welcome our two guests here, so Jackie and Alex, and we can go to each of you here and start off maybe just briefly and tell us first just a little bit about yourself and your technology. So we just get a little bit of a context. So let me start off first with you, Alex. Tell us a little bit about yourself and Navi Medical.
Great. Well, thanks, Paul, for the opportunity to talk here. As you mentioned, my name's Alex. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Navi Medical Technologies. We're a Melbourne-based startup company working on some technology that helps with the placement and maintenance of central lines in pediatric patients, and specifically in neonatal patients. Actually, my background is maybe a little bit different. I actually came from the aerospace industry, and after working in that industry for about a decade, decided that I wanted to change and explore something else, and sort of found my way into MedTech. And actually, I love it. And you know, doing programs like MedTech Innovator is really helpful for somebody coming from a different industry, because it sort of supplements all of the experiential learning that you get along the way as a founder with the advice and networks of people that can, you know, help you on your way.
Excellent, Alex. Well, we're really glad you decided to come over to the MedTech industry. You've added a huge amount of value already, and it's great to have you and someone with your kind of background in this industry. So thanks for doing that. We'll dig in a little more to you in a moment. Let me go over to Jackie. So Jacqueline Savage, you want to tell us a little bit about yourself and MedCorp?
Thanks, Paul. By the way, Jackie is 100% fine. I should have picked up on the Jacqueline on that page there. But yeah, I mean, thank you very much for having me as well. And obviously the MTI team, it's great to see you all again. As mentioned, I'm Jackie Savage. I'm the founder and CEO of MedCorp Technologies. Our platform piece of technology, which we've been developing for quite a few years now, is a sensor which can measure core body temperature within clinical accuracy from the surface of the skin, and really focused on that pre-diagnostic or pattern recognition to be able to detect early signs of infections in at-risk patients and detect that early deterioration of patients within the critical care setting within hospitals. By way of background, a bit of a nerdier kind of approach. I am a biomedical engineer by training, and have spent probably my industry experience prior to founding MedCorp was based in medical device development, in development consultancies here in Melbourne. And yeah, it would have been quite a few years ago now that we kind of took that leap of faith to take a piece of technology that I'd been developing for a few years on the weekends and after hours, and has now taken a life of its own and grown to its own business.
Thanks, Jackie. Well, again, just like Alex, it's great having you in our ecosystem. We've learned a lot from you as well. I know as you've learned from us and the others in our program. So it's terrific to have you in this ecosystem. So we'll get a little more into your company and other things in a minute. What I want to start off with is just kind of level setting. For a lot of people out there who are listening and watching this, they wonder, should I apply to MedTech Innovator? So why don't we start off with why you applied to MedTech Innovator? What were you hoping to get out of it? And I'll start with you, Jackie.
So it was actually I wasn't looking or searching for an accelerator program. I have noticed that you have said that you kind of go from pre-seed all the way through to Series kind of C in terms of the acceptance. And I think I'd held a preconceived stereotype of accelerators potentially focusing a little bit more in the pre-seed and seed space. And that had been my historical experience with other accelerator programs. And we're past that phase and kind of, I felt we're probably a little bit too beyond going into an accelerator. But off the back of 2020 and the year that was COVID, that very much shocked a lot of businesses, and especially being in Melbourne, being in lockdown for the majority of the last 2 years, I felt it was a perfect opportunity to just kind of stop and almost take a bit of a helicopter view of where we were at and do a bit of a stock take, but more importantly, really do work on the business, not in the business, and reach out to people, like you said, get outside of the echo chamber and get people to give that fresh perspective and fresh eyes on the business that we perhaps have been, in a bit of a tunnel vision in our commercial strategy, looking at markets such as the US and Japan. So I saw it as an incredible opportunity. It was a kind of, I was one of the applicants that probably should have prioritized some more time. I was actually doing the pitch events I was sending off the application on the morning of my wedding day and doing the pitch event in the honeymoon. So it was not incredibly well planned, and it was quite rushed at my end because I really just saw a bit of an aha moment. This is time to do it. And I'm so glad that we did. And it was definitely exactly what we needed to bring in those fresh eyes and to really pull apart our market access strategy from a global perspective, but also we were focusing on our Japan market at that time. But it was really, really valuable for us.
Excellent. Good. Yeah, no, I was going to bring up the point that you responded to the pitch event information literally, I think 30 minutes before you walked down the aisle, right? Something like that. So that was great. Great enthusiasm and support for your commitment, clearly. So thank you for that, Jackie. All right, so we'll get more into a little more of your experience in a moment. I'm going to ask the same question to Alex, though. Alex, you want to tell us from your perspective as well? So you heard Jackie talk about, her kind of misconception, especially as it relates to accelerators. And did you share something similar? What was your motivation for applying to MedTech Innovator?
Yeah, similar in the sense of wanting to get out of the echo chamber, certainly. We actually learned about MedTech Innovator through a previous accelerator that we did. And we applied for the US program, and we were accepted in the pediatric cohort. And so we actually went through the US program. There was a lot of 2 and 3 a.m. calls. And we were really successful in that sort of pediatric accelerator program. The next year we heard about MTI APAC, and I sort of thought to myself, actually, our focus has been so heavily on the US and European markets. I don't actually know that much about the markets in my own neighborhood. I want to learn more. And that's sort of what triggered me to apply for the APAC program. And I'm really glad that I did. We learned a lot about, even the markets that are much closer than the US. So, I think just like Jackie, getting the feedback from people, there's value to even doing the application and pitching, because the feedback you get from that is helpful, let alone the feedback from the mentoring and the weekly sort of curriculum.
Excellent. Yeah, no, I remember very clearly when we got your application for the Asia Pacific program. I remember looking around at the team going, hey, Alex is applying again. And does it make sense for him to participate again? I know you were interested in applying, but, we talked with all the people on the team. Does it make sense again? And we had a similar discussion. And again, we're trying to help you be successful. And ultimately, it was a decision that, we mirrored your own, which is if they're interested in the Asia Pacific markets and this is an opportunity, then we want to make sure they're educated about how to access those markets so that you don't have the mistakes that others make where they're just not prepared and they don't have the right a validation data or a strategy to enter those markets. So very glad you applied for both programs because it worked out really well to have you back to back in both of those. So that was great. Thank you for doing that and for mentioning it. Well, you both already talked a little bit about market access. So let's talk a little bit about your mentors. And I mentioned before, for everyone again who's listening, that this is really a corporate mentorship program, along with all sorts of other people that you'll meet and be mentored by. But the key part of this is corporate mentorship. And so I'd like to hear from each of you a little bit about who your mentors were, and what you can tell us about that experience of being mentored, because for a lot of people, I don't even know what that means. What is mentorship, and is it just like one phone call and they give you some feedback, or is it something more? So why don't I start off first with you, Alex? Tell us about who are your mentors in the program, and what can you tell us about that experience?
Yeah, we had two mentors in the MTI APAC program. We had Nipro, who were based out of Japan, and Andrew Preseries, who was Cambridge Consultants. So we work differently with both mentors. With Nipro, I think it's so helpful having a mentor who's so knowledgeable about a market that can be difficult to find information about. It was difficult for us previously to learn much about the Japanese market without being able to go there and potentially talk to people. So having people with such sort of a depth of industry insight and could give us some really helpful information in validating the problem and the market size in a key market for us was really helpful. On the other side, Andrew from Cambridge was so helpful in just acting like a soundboard. So we caught up on a weekly basis with Andrew. He really tested us with some of our assumptions and tried to help validate some of the big assumptions around our commercial strategy. When we sort of uncovered an area that we needed a bit more help, he was very generous in opening up his network to us. And so I think there was a huge amount of value in sort of having a fresh perspective, but then also tapping into his network.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, it's something that I've found over and over again, is that these are relationships that, like the one you made with Andrew, these are that you'll carry on. It's not just during the program. I'm sure you've continued, and if you haven't, you should definitely continue to do that. But these are people that you want to stay in contact with, because what happens is they become your champions, both within their organizations and then all over the place. And they'll be talking to someone, and someone will say, "Oh, we're looking for a panelist for something." I'll say, "Oh, you should talk to Alex. He's great," or they'll be talking to a client who maybe is looking to make an acquisition, and Cambridge is advising them, and they'll say, "Oh, Navi Medical, you should look at that company." So it's just getting on the radar and having somebody in your corner really makes such a huge difference. So that's great. I'm glad you had that experience. Now I know, Jackie, you had Nipro as a mentor as well. So love to hear about your experience with them, as well as anything else you want to share.
I mean, my experience was fantastic with Nipro. Not that dissimilar to what Alex mentioned in terms of the generosity of time and knowledge and depth of knowledge in a market that is quite challenging to I guess, gain access and information to, which has been Japan. And that was a market that we were really focused on as well, knowing that our technology was a really strong value narrative to be had within their healthcare system. So I think the mentorship was probably one of my favorite and probably the most valuable piece that we kind of got out of the entire accelerator program. So I really encourage anybody who goes through it to really, really dig deep and really work closely and respect, obviously, the mentor's time in doing that. So Nipro were really, really great. We walked in there with a question and a list of all of our assumptions. Basically saying, here is what we think, throw it at the wall and tear it apart. So we kind of went in with a bit of confidence behind us to be told that this was wrong and that's not going to work and this is why. And we kind of needed to back ourselves a little bit to know that we were doing that. It was a bit intimidating at the beginning, but we sent through iterations kind of on a fortnightly basis of research we were doing, how our studies and our trials at the time were going, what we were learning, but also the assumptions that we were making about our target patient populations and our market access strategies. And that was probably the biggest learning we had, was that a market access strategy for the US is very different to Japan. And as a result, your value analysis of the product and obviously the product offering that you provide has to change and adapt accordingly as well. So we had the fantastic opportunity to not directly speak to, but to field questions and information packs about our technology to their clinical network. So we had direct feedback from customers and end users through that mentorship, which is, in my opinion, is from a product development and engineering perspective, and then putting the commercial hat on, probably the most valuable thing you can do in any business before you try and enter a market, is actually talk to your customers, whether it be the hospitals, the reimbursement, or the physicians or the actual patients themselves, understanding what they need, where they see value in your product, and then how you translate that and pull that together into a market access strategy. And so that was hands down probably the most incredible feedback we could get, because it did change. It changed a lot around what we were thinking, and really shone a light on some of the misconceptions or things that we'd kind of just assumed would be a known kind of down the track, generation 3 device output, and maybe pulling some of those features back into a first gen market launch in Japan, as opposed to the other way around, which has been incredible for us and definitely changed that strategy immensely.
Fantastic. I know they gave you a lot of information and a lot of feedback, and the fact that you were open to receiving it, I think, is half the battle too, because a lot of times people will come into a program like this, and we'll have our partners step up and agree to mentor, and they'll give feedback, and a lot of companies will just say, nah, I disagree, and not take the advice. And you have to, as the CEO, you have to make the decision of what advice to listen to and which advice not to listen to. But I think you made the wise decision of following that guidance. As you said, the Japanese market is very different than the U.S. market, and the same would be true of China or other markets as well. And they're very nuanced, and understanding from someone who's got that their feet on the ground there, and so much time and energy that they've spent there, is a really unique opportunity, and not something, you could have paid consultants, I guess, to do something like that, but this is completely different, right? All right, so excuse me, let me go back to Alex here for a moment. So Alex, one of the things that I think people talk a lot about, again, I think we heard a little bit about this before, is this question of am I too late, for an accelerator? Now, MedTech Innovator, I'll tell everybody again, I'll just make the point that we are not a concept stage accelerator. We are not looking for people who just have an idea and are looking to learn how to start a company. We're looking for companies. We're looking for people who are up and running. Just tell me really quickly about what stage you were at when you entered MedTech Innovator in terms of your development and your funding.
Yeah, good question. So I think at the time of application, we were just getting ready, just starting to plan out our Series A round. So we had a clinical prototype in use in the hospital setting. So I'd say that on the TRL level, we might have been about a 4 or 5, probably a 5, but yeah, probably pre-Series A.
Pre-Series A, and you were clinical in stage. So, just to point out again to the audience, that's really interesting, right? So, Jackie, how about you in terms of your stage? Where were you in terms of stage of development and funding?
Not that dissimilar. We have a bit of we kind of took a bit of a cheeky, so cheeky is not the right word, but I would say in terms of a Series A positioning, very similar to Alex in that respect. We had previously taken a bit of a different commercialization and funding path over the last 3 years, and had spun out our technology in a consumer infant health and development brand, as well as applications in the agriculture market for infection control and livestock. So we had a little bit in terms of pulling in revenue from those businesses to support continued development in clinical. But we had the beginning of COVID, before all of our trials kind of got a little bit derailed in ICUs, we obviously having in-field prototypes being used in a clinical setting. But again, not that dissimilar to Alex. The source of our funding was just a little bit more creative.
Excellent. All right, so I'm going to pause here for a moment, and I'm going to let the audience I'm going to remind you that this is the time to start putting in some questions. I see some coming into the Q&A already. So if you have questions about the program, if there's things that I've talked about that you're not clear about, or things that we haven't mentioned yet that you have questions about, cue those up in the Q&A, and we'll start to get to those. and then we'll go back and forth to continuing to ask questions with our panelists here. So, so let me take the first question I see in the Q&A, which is from Priya, who asks, we're based in India in the prototyping stage. Will MedTech Innovators program be useful for us at this stage? And Priya, the answer is yes. This is a great time because you still have an opportunity to make changes to your technology. And that's what this program is about, is giving companies that will hopefully be your partner at some point down the road a chance to give you input on your technology at a time when you can still make changes. So yes, this would still be a good stage. And of course, now, you know, depending on how much evidence you have and other things, that might determine whether or not we accept you, but being at the prototype stage is just fine. So thank you for that question. All right, so let me keep going, Alex and Jackie, with some other questions for you. So in terms of the size of your teams, you know, in the terms of the number of people who were involved in MedTech Innovator from your companies, it's one of the questions we get a lot about is, you know, how many people participate or how many should participate. So let me start with you, Jackie, on this. How many people are in your company or were in your company at the time of MedTech Innovator, especially if you remember? And how many were involved in the program in any kind of a way?
I think at the time we had 9. I think at the time we kind of went through a bit of a contraction and then a bit more of an expansion on the other side of that. But in terms of the core team, excluding, I guess, contractors that were coming in, probably around 9. I, at the time, because we were running lean, was probably the most involved in the accelerator, and I regret not carving out a little bit more time for the team to be involved. We did all, however, all listen to all the webinar series that were running, and it was probably more with our mentors trying to coordinate and carve out that time to do those discussions, and those meetings was mainly myself and maybe 1 or 2 other people. But predominantly, I would recommend the more in your team that you can get involved, the better. And I think the webinars were fantastic for the team to listen to because it just gives an understanding. I think even if you've just got your tech dev team or you have your clinical team or whatever, as much as you can get people under a united understanding of where you're going, what are the hurdles and what do you need to achieve, it just makes from a team leadership perspective and a unified vision perspective incredibly valuable. And then you get questions that are being asked from whether it be a software engineer about FDA and all of that. You get that kind of cross-pollination of questions that you might not necessarily have flagged yourself or thought to ask. So yeah, I encourage everyone to get as much and as many people within your team involved as possible.
Thanks, Jackie. And Alex, how about you?
Yeah, similar to Jackie, we've got a team of 7 people, half full-time and half part-time. It was interesting, actually. In the first time I went through the US pediatric program, I think I was the only person to dial in at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning consistently. But I did find that there was a lot more interest in dialing in and listening to the MTI APAC events because the timing was just right. So we tended to have kind of a lunch and learn thing on a weekly basis, where, you know, it just happened that in Australia the sessions were about lunchtime, so our whole team sort of dialed in and listened. And then for the mentoring as well, we had you know, often several people from Navi joining in and sort of contributing and asking questions and validating some of our assumptions. So I completely agree with what Jackie said. The more people that you can bring to these events, the more you'll get out of it.
Yeah, and you've both mentioned the webinars. So I didn't really go into those in detail before, but they're weekly sessions that we do. They're completely customized to the interests of our cohort. So we start off and we survey everybody and say, you know, what's your interest in funding? What's your interest level in product development, regulatory, market access, and so on, and specific countries. And then we program the webinars based on the interests of the cohort. And they're really an opportunity to learn from experts, but also to do Q&A. So we have a live 1-hour session that anybody out there in the ecosystem, anyone who's watching right now, you guys can all tune into those webinars too for the first hour. And then we do 30 minutes of private Q&A at the tail. And that's the session where, you know, Jackie and Alex and, you know, others are able to sit there and ask questions. And it's with the recording off, and we're not, nothing's being broadcast. So it's a good, safe time to do that and ask things that, maybe you wouldn't always ask. So it's a really nice environment. I know you guys both were heavy participants in that. So I'm glad you both mentioned it. All right, let me go on to another topic over here, which is things that you do during the program that maybe you didn't expect. And I know, Jackie, you've told me a number of times that you guys made a pivot during the program. And I know in the tech space, people pivot all the time because, maybe you're developing an app for one thing and no one's interested and your team pivots and does something else. But in healthcare, it's harder to pivot. So tell us what you mean by that and, whatever you can share about that experience.
Micro pivot is probably the better way to describe it. It was, I think, going back to the point when we gained access to some great feedback from the customer and end user base for the technology within the ICU or clinical setting in Japan. It really shone a light on, and even from the pitching events that we had, where we were receiving feedback from potential mentors from other companies and also potential investors. There was this feedback in terms of how do you differentiate yourself from a wearable thermometer that might be like for like on the market. And we made this assumption that people understood that we're doing this in a way that matches the gold standard accuracy, which is one element to kind of say, where your kind of value add sits. But I think we've made the assumption around the fact that people were taking a technology that can be worn for 24 hours and can monitor a patient in a 24-hour setting and assume that they would be able to pick up on the fact that it's the early detection of patient deterioration, which is actually what we're doing, given that it's a vital sign. But we'd never really pushed that very far. We knew it, and I think from a scientific point, and this is getting outside the echo chamber again, I think you can kind of just sit there and assume that, well, that makes sense to everybody else. But when you're so deep in the tech and you have your blinkers on a little bit, you forget sometimes what probably your most valuable asset is in the technology that you may have spent the last decade developing. And so for us, that was a real eye-opener, and that we'd kind of regained this feedback and had heard, ultimately where the value of your technology isn't in being necessarily a next generation thermometer where you can have a non-invasive, highly accurate temperature reading to detect early signs of fever. It's that early signs piece that you really need to hone in on. And the fact that you're doing it continuously lends itself to sophisticated algorithms that we've been developing over the last 4 years that becomes a predictive tool. So during the course of the program, we completed a couple of studies and also collaborated with a couple of people in the US who had been doing a study in sepsis in the tracking of the 24-hour circadian rhythm in patients that become septic. And we were seeing quite strong correlations ourselves internally, but also in peer research showing that mapping that temperature cycle, you can actually start to see phase shifts and amplitude changes and frequency changes up to 70 hours before the patient receives its first fever. So that for us was, we knew that was a huge capability for us and something that we would probably do and push in our data analytics and algorithms in a Mark 3, Mark 4 device or down the track. But ultimately, as a market access strategy, that's really where our value is the fact that we're a screening tool for really adverse events that can occur in patients within the healthcare setting. And ultimately, the time from an adverse event to diagnosis and intervention is the goal of what we should be focusing on in healthcare in order to alleviate the strains that we've seen within our hospital settings, especially in a COVID environment. So that was the bit of the pivot, I guess. We're not changing our technology, but we've just basically taken an element that we knew was great and a nice to have as a future product feature and prioritize that as our primary feature with a market launch device. So instead of calling ourselves a digital thermometer, very much a screening tool for patient deterioration and at risk of infections.
That's a really important understanding that you came to. And as you said, you might not have come to that if it wasn't for some of the mentorship and the advice you got. And the problem, again, for those who are out there is that a lot of companies go down a path and you have your assumptions and and you find that, the market's not that interested in what you're doing, or it's hard to get any kind of adoption, and you struggle, and eventually, the technologies, just fail and they run out of money, but for the wrong reason. As you said, early detection, that's what everyone's after. And being able to see people deteriorating before they know they're deteriorating, before the healthcare provider knows they're deteriorating, is everything. So that's just one example, but I'm really glad that you were able to get to that kind of an insight. So thanks for sharing that. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Yeah. All right. So again, anyone who's got questions, submit them in the chat or submit them into the Q, especially the Q&A. That's easier for us. And we'll get to those as well. So let me talk a little bit about applying. So applying to MedTech Innovator is reasonably simple. You go to medtechinnovator.org. You set up a user account. You enter some information about yourself. Then you enter some information about your company, and then you do an application. In the application, you can choose between the 3 different programs. In this case, Asia Pacific, we're talking about. I want to ask you, Alex and Jackie, how hard was it to apply? Was that a big burden? And does that take a lot of time, or was it reasonably easy? So I'll start with you, Alex. How was that for you? And you did it several years in a row, so I'm sure it got easier. But how was it for you?
Yeah, we were able to leverage a little bit from the first application. I mean, look, it's a 3-4 hours of sort of thinking about responses to some questions and putting some things together. It's not a massive burden, especially if you're sort of used to putting together grant applications or pitch decks, and sort of being able to communicate your value proposition and the problem solution fit. I think that's probably one piece of advice I'd give to people, is just really make sure that you get those 2 elements solid. Focus on those 2 elements. But I think my advice to people would be, just give it a go. You've got nothing to lose, everything to gain. It'll take you a few hours of your time, but really I would encourage people to give it a go.
And Jackie, any other thoughts?
No, I completely agree with Alex. I think it's not a challenging application process. It is if you haven't clearly being able to, I guess, crystallize the value proposition of your technology, and even just applying in doing that exercise, if that's not something you have worked on yet within the business, is a fabulous thing to do, and a fundamental piece of work that needs to be done regardless. So if you are in that earlier stage, then I would suggest to apply, just so you've got a framework to use to navigate that. But no, it's like Alex said, it's a couple of hours of answering questions, which, I mean, is not, there were no surprises there by any means, and quite consistent with any kind of pitch deck, previous accelerator, or a grant application. And it's just articulating the unmet need in the market and what your proposal and solution is around that, and where the benefit and value lies. So I highly recommend everybody do it.
Thanks, guys. I appreciate that endorsement and the fact that it is not a huge amount of time. So thank you for that. Okay, and then also lastly, I just want to ask, kind of in general, any other advice for participating in the program, how to get the most out of mentorship? Any other things you want to share, and then we can wrap up. So Alex, Jackie, anything else?
Yeah, a couple of tips. Focus on, once you're into the program and you're able to talk to your mentors, really try to figure out what your most important assumptions are, and test them, really test them and validate them. And you'll see that it's a little bit like a rabbit hole. You'll start to go down and uncover all sorts of other things that you might need to discuss and validate. Be diligent and, follow up with people and do the background work that you'll say you'll do. But lastly, I think connect with other startups, particularly with the US program that I did. I actually made some really, really valuable connections with other startups, and there's an opportunity to communicate with the other startups on a Slack platform, and take that opportunity. It's really good.
No, I definitely would agree as well with Alex there. I think not necessarily setting yourself an agenda, but having an understanding of what your assumptions are is really important. I think if you can understand what you know, and then maybe what you don't know as well, sets a really great tone and lens to go through the program with, because you'll be looking at things quite differently. Don't be afraid to have people comment and give feedback that's going to be potentially quite abrasive to the ego. I think if we didn't have such an openness and willingness and eagerness to learn and really seeking that feedback, we definitely wouldn't be coming out of the program and into this year in such a strong position. And I think that goes for every startup is, if you say you know everything and you don't need support or anything, then you're not going to get the insight. So I think being really honest and transparent and vulnerable from a technical point of view so that you can really soak up as much knowledge and provide people the opportunity to contribute to you is probably the biggest advice that I can give around this, because these people who are surrounding the program and as well as the mentors have a wealth of knowledge and a depth of knowledge that I don't think any single startup would have, because we probably just kind of go through the commercialization processes. But these are subject matter experts that are always going to know more than you. And so really draw on that and obviously respect people's time, follow up do the work when you say you're going to do the work. But I also suggest going into it, having done a bit of work on what you want to get out of it.
That's really good advice from both of you, especially Jackie, what you just said there at the end. Go into it knowing what you want to get out of it. Don't come into it and just go, hey, we're here and we're just here to learn. Take some time to think about it. Like we start the program off and the first thing we do is we ask you, what is it you're hoping to get out of MedTech Innovator? And you should have that time to think about it. You don't have to think about it when you apply necessarily, but you certainly have to think about it when you make it into the program, because we are going to focus our efforts on trying to deliver on the milestones you're hoping to achieve, or whatever your goals are for the program. So that's really good advice. And certainly, I think from both of you, as you said, taking the time to just apply will give you insight into the kinds of questions that people like investors and strategics and others are going to want to ask you at some point in the process. We've designed the whole application around my background as a venture capitalist and the kinds of questions that I ask companies and the kinds of questions that we see other people asking, so that we make sure that you're thinking of these things and you're prepared to think about them as you enter the program. So it's great. It's great, great advice you gave. Just applying is an education in some ways in itself, because you will see the things that you don't know. If you don't know those, hopefully you know all the answers. But if you don't, this gives you a chance to take a little bit of time and think of the answers to those questions. Let me take a moment here and answer one of the questions in the Q&A. So Alfredo asks, for the companies that are chosen to participate in the program, is that an indication or a validation that there's real need for such a product as assessed by MedTech executives? Yes, that is a very good question, Alfredo, and the answer is yes. So what I mean by that is being selected for MedTech Innovator, being selected just to pitch, to advance to the pitch events, where we'll have at least 3 times the number of companies pitch, then we'll be able to actually be in the accelerator cohort. Just being selected to that means that at least one of our corporate partners was interested in seeing you pitch. So we don't just invite anybody. We start a process where we have investors, we have strategics, we have clinicians, customers, hospital systems and others who are participating in the online review process. So they're reading your applications and they're making recommendations, but ultimately our corporate partners have to say, I would like to see that company pitch. Like they literally raise their virtual hand and tell us they want to see these companies pitch. They'll say like, I want to see MedCorp, I want to see Navi and so on. And we invite those companies to pitch in those pitch events that we mentioned earlier, the road tour. So just being selected for the road tour means that at least one of our corporate partners and probably multiple said, I'd like to see that company pitch, because I can promise you more companies are selected, are given that like, yes, we'd like to see them pitch, then we can even have pitch. So, so that is a validation in itself. And then being selected for the accelerator means that you have to have basically been more interesting than all the other companies that pitched in that process, or at least as interesting as the ones who are your peers that we select. So yes, Alfredo, it is a validation. And we find that there are many investors and others who literally just kind of hang around the MedTech Innovator ecosystem because they know that the companies that have made it to the accelerator, and certainly the ones who come out on the other side, which is everybody, those are all companies that are going to be strong companies. and really interesting potential investments or acquisition candidates and so on. So yes, it is a validation, and that's a good point, Alfredo. So thank you for making that. All right, and so other questions, if anyone has any other questions, we have about 4 more minutes or 3 more minutes to answer those, and then we'll wrap up. Last couple of things here. So I want to point out a couple of things, then I may ask 1 or 2 last closing questions here for Alex and Jackie. One question that people ask all the time is, if I've applied before, should I apply again, even if I wasn't, accepted the first time? The answer is absolutely. Every year we have companies that apply and that we don't accept into the program. We may not even invite them to pitch in the pitch events. And then they apply the next year, and either same thing happens, or sometimes we accept them into the program. And as I mentioned, we have competitions at the end. We've had, for the last several years, the companies that have won our finals competitions have been rejected in a prior year. And that happens all the time. And the reason that happens is that our corporate partners change every year, and they change their areas of interest every year. So a company that in one year says, hey, we're developing a technology for navigation in pediatric patients, and our corporate partners go, it's not really of interest to us right now. The following year, they go, oh, that's actually really interesting to us right now. And that company gets accepted. These things change. In the COVID environment, all sorts of attitudes have changed about certain types of technologies. And also, our partners are very smart, and they look at technologies and they'll go, oh, that's interesting what they're doing over here, but maybe they should be doing something over here. Even kind of as Jackie was talking about her micro pivot, people see other indications, they see other opportunities, and they'll say, that company we looked at last year, that's pretty interesting now. So again, if you've applied in the past and we didn't pick you, it doesn't mean you shouldn't apply again. There is a very good chance of being picked in a subsequent year. And I have had companies apply 3 years before we accepted them. And it's just, the right time for the right company. So please do apply again, even if we didn't pick you before. All right, let's see. I don't see any other questions. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to Jackie and Alex one last time for a closing thought. Anything else you want to share about MedTech Innovator, about yourselves? If you want to, if you guys are fundraising, anything else you want to tell people, and where they can find you as well. So I'll start with you, Alex.
Always fundraising. So if anybody's interested about pediatric startups, come and have a chat. But look, the last thing that I wanted to say is, Paul, thank you. You're probably like one of the most generous and well-networked people in the industry. I've contacted you half a dozen times after the program for help, and you have been able to listen and provide some guidance. So that's another benefit to the program, is you get to talk to people like Paul, probably one of the most well-connected people in the whole ecosystem. So that alone is probably worth an application.
Thanks, Alex. It's very nice. I appreciate that. Jackie.
Always capital raising, always looking for people who are interested. I think we always never turn that one down. I think just again, thank you so much, I guess, to Paul and the team. It is truly, I've done accelerators in the past, and I think this is definitely probably the one where we've had the greatest value. I think the timing was fabulous. And I think especially in the climate that we have, where it is such a changing backdrop with COVID, that now more than ever gaining access to knowledge and real-time on-the-ground knowledge in the markets that you're seeking is really, really important, because things are changing. So having access to that is incredible. And again, the team at MedTech Innovator are incredibly supportive. And I know, Paul, I'm still owe you a catch-up. So I'm calling in on the catch-up that we needed to reschedule. So again, thank you. And I mean, the network is incredible, and I genuinely encourage everybody to get involved.
Excellent. Hey, listen, thank you both for those comments. You also said something in there too that I want to repeat again, which is that both of you were in other accelerators before MedTech Innovator, and both of you got value from doing this. So thank you for making that point, because again, it's another common misconception. People are like, oh, I've already been in an accelerator. This one is different, right? So thank you both for making those points and for all your feedback and guidance, and of course for your engagement. You guys are terrific, and really thrilled that you chose to apply and that you were accepted and that you agreed to be part of this today. I picked some really good people, so thank you for that. So thank you again, both. Anyone who's interested in their companies, you can find Navi Medical and MedCorp on LinkedIn or on their website. It's pretty easy to Google for them. All right. So with that, thank you both for being here. And I want to go back to Jeff Malone to close us out. Jeff, thank you for having us today.
Oh, thanks, Paul, and then thank you again to Alex and Jackie, and of course to Frederick and Sakina and Devira and everybody at MedTech Innovator. It's been collaborating with MedTech Innovator to help them connect with startups and others in our ecosystem has been great. Victoria specifically was recently identified in the top 10% of startup ecosystems globally, and so our collaboration with MedTech Innovator not only helps those specific startups to get connected in to MedTech Innovator in the program, but also helps shine a light for investors and others around the world on the strong ecosystem that we've got here. And so with that, just thank you. And as mentioned, applications for the 2022 cohorts are open now and will close on the 15th of February. As a reminder, please jump onto the MedTech Innovator website to find out more. And of course, if you have any more burning questions, don't hesitate to reach out to myself or another member of BioMelbourne Network team, or of course, Paul and Frederick and the others at MedTech Innovator. With that, that concludes our session, and thank you all for joining us wherever you are in the world today.